One of the areas is the question of Taiwan. Let us understand, when Xi Jinping came to power in 2013, one of the ambitions of Xi Jinping was to become a greater leader than Mao Zedong, perhaps the greatest leader that China would have ever produced. To do that, one of the first things that Xi Jinping laid out, or one of the consistent points that he's laid out, is the reunification of Taiwan with China. Is a stronger China, is a China that has got a stronger naval influence across the world. To do that, the ability to demonstrate how strong, how influential China is, can only be done by that one action which Xi Jinping hopes would happen one day, which is the unification of Taiwan. Is that going to happen? Is that possible? Is Ukraine similar to Taiwan, or is Taiwan, as helpless as Ukraine? When we look at Taiwan, and we'll look at a few things in Indo-Pacific that are red flags here. Taiwan has, if you look at Taiwan has relations with only a handful of countries, whereas Ukraine had a relationship with 180 countries across the world. When we look at Taiwan, the other factor that comes about is that, unlike Ukraine, Taiwan has had a long history of economic, political, and strategic relationship with the West, with the United States. We say, and it is often said, that the U.S. failed in protecting, or failed in Afghanistan insofar as protecting its interests. The U.S. failed in protecting Ukraine, which it sought to protect at some point of time, and egged on in the war against Russia. So if that has happened, will the US fail again in Taiwan, is a question that is often asked, because that will actually finish the American influence, the American hegemony as a superpower in the world, and signal the rise of China. Will that happen? The question is, therefore, I would answer it differently. Taiwan is a major economic power, unlike Ukraine, in the sense that today, in a digitized world, it holds 92% of the semiconductor market. Now, why the semiconductor chips are important? As the IT industry grows, as the Chinese IT industry grows, as the world automobile industry grows, the requirement of semiconductor chips in the manufacture of all these items and every other thing is extremely important. Without these semiconductor chips being supplied by Taiwan, the world will not progress, the world will not function, the economy of the world will suffer a huge disaster. Taiwan holds 92% of that market. The rest 8% is held disparately, mostly by South Korea. So one is that. The second, and how has it grown? How has it grown to have such a huge influence on the world global semiconductor chip market? Is because over the years, it has got integrated with the US in terms of its business, in terms of its economy. Taiwan is US's 5th largest good trading partner. I don't have the numbers in terms of what is I think it's about $90 billion. It's a 5th largest trading partner in the world. So when you talk about artificial intelligence, when you talk about Google, when you talk about the various US companies, Amazon, Facebook, none of them would want the Taiwan economy to collapse, because that will signal the collapse of US corporate hegemony. So if you see, the business interests in Taiwan and Ukraine were not predominant enough, were not strong enough for the Americans or the West to really intervene there. Afghanistan, it's a no-brainer. When we talk about Taiwan, the business interests, the economic interests actually override a lot of other interests. And that would be a significant determinant in ensuring that Taiwan is no easy invasion for China. And it's not a template, unlike the Ukraine unlike Ukraine was for Russia. China thought that the Russia the war would be a template for China's invasion of Taiwan if that had finished quickly. Now that has not. Ukraine has stood up. Uh, yes, of course, with help from the Western powers. But here there is a completely different kind of a template, given the fact that Taiwan is connected economically with the rest of the world. The second thing that I want to bring out here is that if you look at China, and this is from a military point of view, China has been the master of posturing. China has never fought a successful campaign since 1979, when it went to Vietnam and went there and it launched a war in Vietnam with disastrous consequences. So China has not had a successful campaign. The last successful campaign China had was in the 50s and in the 60s, in 1962 against India. After that, it had had a defeat against India in 1967, which I spoke about, which I've written about in my book, Watershed, 1967. And 1979, it suffered against Vietnam as well. We must also understand a very lesser known battle that took place between China and Taiwan in 1958, which we don't speak about. Chinese planes flew over Taiwan wanting to capture Taiwan. And those were the days when China wanted to, and Mao Zedong was on a high, was marching ahead. Chiang Kai-shek was on the defensive. He was a Taiwanese leader. But despite the fact that they had an overwhelming superiority at that point of time, they could not capture Taiwan. And in 1958, though they had the better of the exchanges, Taiwan asked for American assistance and actually fought off the Chinese Air Force with lesser number of planes. But that was a very limited skirmish that had happened in 1958. So China is wary. Chinese planners do not go to war if they're not very sure that they would actually succeed in that. And that is where I feel China's ambitions on Taiwan comes unstuck. So what happens to Xi Jinping? Xi Jinping has been talking about the unification of Taiwan. So we talk about the options of China on Taiwan and what is going to happen in that region. So we talk about whether China is going to invade Taiwan. There are people who say yes, there are people who say no. Then I don't think China is going to outrightly invade Taiwan in the recent future, in the current future. Maybe in the long term, we don't know. The second option is whether China is not going to invade Taiwan. I don't think that is possible as well. I mean, I don't think China is going to sit back and not invade Taiwan. So what is the outcome then? If they're not going to invade, or if they're going to launch an invasion, if both these options of launching an invasion and not launching an invasion are not true, what could be the third option? And that's where I believe that the Chinese way of looking at it, or here in Asia, we ought to look at things from an Asian template and not from a Western template, which is where China has been. The West believes believes in an invasion or in the second option of a country not invading. I would think the Chinese, the way they have gone about in the last 40-45 years, as I said, China has not launched an invasion since 1979. But China has always believed in salami slicing, has always believed in nibbling, putting, the 9-dash line where they have made artificial islands and have, claimed the sea, the nautical miles around it, which is allowed by the UN, UNOCLOS, the United Nations Council on Land and Sea. So China has always believed in nibbling away, which is what is being described often as salami slicing. So what would China do as far as Taiwan? In 1958, China tried to attack the Kinmen Islands. You see, the Kinmen Islands not very far away from the Chinese coast. Yet, they today are still with Taiwan. And as the war was about to begin in Ukraine in February, very few people know that Chinese planes, there were 21 fighter jets that flew over Taiwan and actually made Taiwan scramble its fighter jets. The reason why it flew over Taiwan at that point of time in January, end of January, was to see what is the reaction. And soon enough, a few weeks later, Russia invaded Ukraine. The war started. China was testing the waters as to what would happen. The war in Ukraine has not gone um, as far as China's plans or China's thoughts would have been, or as China would have liked. And now, the one thing the third option which I talk about as to what would China do in the case of Taiwan is to look at the smaller islands, the Penghu Islands, or we don't see it in the map. There are certain islands south of Taiwan which they would want to um, take on, block block the trade routes of Taiwan, put pressure on Taiwan by nibbling away on into islands that are far away from the mainland of Taiwan, and hope that the United States does not interfere, because you can always say that we have not attacked the mainland of Taiwan, but we are only claiming some of these islands which are around Taiwan, which is a midway, which is a sort of a middle path that China might want to take on, squeeze Taiwan economically, nibble away at the islands, and hope at some point of time they're able to launch their ultimate invasion, which is what I believe is perhaps the Chinese theory insofar as Taiwan is concerned, given their history of nibbling away, given their history of salami slicing, and given their history of not being able to deploy a full-fledged invasion successfully for almost half a century. That, I believe, is what China would possibly do. But it is also quite clear that unlike Ukraine, where the European powers haven't been able to really move and prevent a war. In this case, what happens is that geographically, if China were to launch an aggression against Taiwan, it violates the Japanese airspace. So when this happened, when the Chinese fighter jets went in January this year, they actually disturbed the Japanese airspace, and that provoked Japan. Shinzo Abe, no less, former president, he said that Japan should obtain a security guarantee from the U.S. and should rethink its nuclear plans. Now that split opinion in Japan. I don't want to go into the Second World War, but post the Second World War, Japanese military expansion had been kept in check given the Japanese role in the Second World War. But now Japan and thinkers in Japan, presidents in Japan have started to have started to express that time has come to give it a rethink in the light of the rise of the rise of China in the region.